if you go back and you look at the actual platform commitments of all political parties, you will see that there was some degree in there of moving forward with a disability, a national disability benefit. Because I think that we've come to a certain place in our society where we respect the fact that we have to start looking at our disability benefits from a national perspective. Right now, like many of the programs that we have out there, there are piecemeal projects in Ontario. There is ODSP, which is the Ontario Disability Support, the Ontario Disability Support Program. There are various different ones in other provinces that are out there. And what we saw in the last election is that all parties had committed to doing something about this very important issue. And it's been called upon us by many individuals throughout the country repeatedly. What we know, Madam Speaker, is that persons with disabilities face very unique challenges that aren't seen and aren't realized the same way as persons without disabilities. We also know that individuals with disabilities, proportionately speaking, represent a larger population of those that are experiencing poverty. And as a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, when you look at the poverty rates, they can be significantly higher amongst individuals that have a disability. And I think one of the very important things to talk about here, Madam Speaker, is that at least from the government's perspective, from the Liberal Party's perspective, when we go to tackle something as large as this, because make no mistake of it, Madam Speaker, this is a very large program that has a lot of moving pieces to it, we need to work with our counterparts. This is not something that is very clear, clean-cut, and simple, and something that can be just tabled, passed, and implemented. This is something where we need to start going back and talking to various different provinces and various different regions that are providing benefits like this. For example, what we don't want to happen in my province of Ontario is to introduce a benefit like this and have our provincial government see it as an opportunity to claw back on existing programs that are already put in place, the ODSP in Ontario, as I just mentioned. If we do that, this benefit will be counterproductive in terms of actually providing more supports for Canadians that really do need them. And so you can imagine, Madam Speaker, when you talk about various different provinces and territories that have to work with the federal government on this, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. That's why this legislation is about framework. It's about establishing the framework by which we can then go and have these discussions and create the right programs to balance them against existing programs that are in place by other provinces and regions, and make sure that there is a net gain to actually lift people with disabilities out of poverty, those that are currently experiencing poverty. And so when we talk about that framework, we talk about the various different things that this bill will seek to do. It's not simple, as I indicated. There's a lot of moving parts. For example, who will be eligible? This bill needs to make sure that it clearly identifies who will be eligible. I know the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, and others spoke earlier about, well, why aren't the details in this bill? The details should be there right now. Well, these are the things that need to be worked out. Who is eligible? The conditions that need to be met to determine eligibility. The amount that individuals will receive. Again, ensuring that anything that is given by from the federal level is not counterproductive or used as an opportunity to claw back at the provincial level. We need to see about indexing this benefit to inflation. We're seeing during certain times of extreme hardships right now as we face global inflation, we see that this benefit would have to somehow adjust to meet those inflationary increases. The payment periods, how often will these payments be made? What is the most beneficial way to make those payments? How will they be rolled out to individuals? These are things that all need to be considered. The application process. How will individuals who currently are perhaps getting other disability payments in other provinces, how will they apply, and how will we ensure fairness across all provinces and territories, despite the fact that many individuals are already accessing other benefits? or applications made on behalf of people who are incapable of making their applications. What will the process be to ensure that that can be taken care of? The circumstances in which an application would be deemed ineligible. There will be times when people are ineligible to receive this benefit, and so we need to make sure that we properly identify those as well. And then, of course, Madam Speaker, there's the other end of this. You know, there's the other end of establishing a list of offenses for people who try to abuse this particular benefit that would be put out there. You know, I know that there's a lot of talk about that. I know it comes up, you know, when especially when people talk about CERB and those that abused CERB. We need to use the time now to ensure that whatever we put in place properly respects and reflects that. So, you know, for example, some of the offenses could be people who falsely identify information, or individuals who are caught to be counseling people on how to falsify information and how to, you know, have the intent to actually steal all or a substantial part of the particular benefit. Or knowingly making false or misleading representation in relation to an application. All of these things need to be properly looked at. And the problem, Madam Speaker, as I previously indicated, is it's not just looking at it through the federal lens. It's not a piece of legislation or a benefit that is not going to be touching upon other benefits that already exist out there. And that's why, for all those reasons that I just talked about, what is being proposed here is framework legislation. Legislation to set up the framework in which this benefit will be established. This is monumental in terms of a national approach. We have never had a benefit like this before. It is long overdue. So many Canadians out there deserve it, and quite frankly have been waiting a long time for it, but we need to continue to push forward and do this properly. What we know, Madam Speaker, is that more than 6 million Canadians over the age of 15, which represents over 20% of Canadians, currently identify with having a disability. That's what we know right now in Canada, that 6 million individuals. Only 59% of Canadians with disabilities, Madam Speaker, between the ages of 25 and 64 were employed in 2017, compared to 80% without disabilities. So we know, Madam Speaker, that those who have disabilities are quite often, the data would indicate that they are not employed from a percentage perspective as much as those without disabilities. And persons with disabilities who were working, this is really important, Madam Speaker, persons with disabilities who were working earn less than Canadians without disabilities, 12% less for those with milder disabilities, and 51% less for those with more severe disabilities. So these are the facts that we know of what the current situation is like when it comes to, you know, we're not even talking about people who aren't working. We're just talking about people who are working and comparing people with disabilities with people without disabilities. And it is as a substantially lower amount that those with disabilities are making than those without disabilities. Madam Speaker, 850,000 Canadians, nearly 21% working age Canadians with disabilities live in poverty. These are individuals who are living below the poverty line and quite often are struggling already as it is, in addition to the increased burden that's placed upon them by having their disability. So we know that, you know, this House has unanimously spoken in favor of bringing forward a disability legislation, Madam Speaker. We're finally seeing this here today. I know that all members of this House support it, and I really hope that we can see this move on so that we can get to the point where we can have a vote on this and we can see it come to fruition. Because there are certain things, Madam Speaker, that I believe that we should try to avoid to the best of our abilities in being political about. And this is probably one of the most important. Taking care of some of the most vulnerable people in our community. If there is no other reason that we assemble in this place, if there's no other reason that government exists, it's to help the most vulnerable people in our communities. And that's exactly what this piece of legislation is doing. It's recognizing the fact that, yes, disabilities are not just what decades ago people may have thought them to be, that they are expansive and include a lot more than those traditional ideas of what a disability was. They do include things like my Conservative colleague mentioned earlier, hearing impairment and a disability to communicate as a result of that. And it is so important that we as government, that we as parliamentarians make sure that we establish the supports necessary to take care of these people in their particular moments of need. So I really hope, Madam Speaker, that we can see this legislation pass through this House, that we can work together to ensure that the framework is moved along as quickly as possible. I would note that the legislation, this particular piece of legislation to establish the framework, requires that after the first 3 years of the disability benefit being in place, that it is reviewed by Parliament, and then again every 5 years after that. And that's unique, because most of the time that review period is a 5-year period. But the importance of this is, I think, is highlighted in the fact that the government insists that there be oversight on this to adjust and to balance and to reposition in the event that things need to be tweaked along the way. So I'll conclude with that, Madam Speaker. I really encourage all members in this House to vote in favor of this. I really hope that we can move quickly on this. I didn't take the full time allotted to me to speak to this, and I hope that others choose the same, and that others choose to indeed help to move this along very quickly so that we can vote on it and that we can put this into legislation and build that framework. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen and Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the speech from the member from Kingston and the Islands. And I also want to just reiterate there's a point of agreement we have. I would not trust my province I would believe all provinces would have